Hello and namaste. I am Atul, and this is the first lecture in the Sanskrit 101 course. I'm very excited to be teaching this. I have been very passionate about Sanskrit for many years. I've been involved in publication and translation in numerous fronts, and I'm very, very happy to be doing this. So our focus in this course is going to be an introduction to Sanskrit in Ayurveda. We're going to cover the objectives of the course, but the whole idea is to give you things that you can use, that you can, as an Ayurvedic practitioner, as a serious student of Ayurveda, that should help you in understanding in whatever context you find yourself in. So let's talk about the course objectives. So about 80% of this course is what's on this slide here. To understand the basic concepts and the nature of the Sanskrit language. So we wanted to get you a bit familiar with Sanskrit and help you to get an idea of sort of how it works, some of the basics of how it works and how it fits together. A 25-hour course is just not enough to really even teach the basics of Sanskrit grammar, but we want to at least get you familiar with sort of the feel of the language and some basic things that, when you understand them, will help you to make sense. We're also going to learn about 100 Sanskrit vocabulary terms that are common in Ayurveda, along with their meanings. So we do have a vocabulary list, and I'm still doing a little bit of reorganization. We've got a fairly large glossary list from previous passes at the Sanskrit 101, and I'm consolidating that and expanding it. So that will be available on the site. But this is one of the major course objectives, is to learn some of the important vocabulary terms in Sanskrit. We also want to learn basics of pronunciation. I have been involved with teaching Sanskrit and also teaching topics that involve a lot of Sanskrit vocabulary, as well as editing books which have a lot of Sanskrit vocabulary. And as someone who's familiar with Sanskrit, when I hear people pronounce things, sometimes my first reaction is, what language is that? It's not really that difficult, but there is a right way to pronounce Sanskrit. It's not, we don't have sounds like in the Kalahari Bush language where you have that click sound you have to make in the back of your throat that I have never been able to do. But there are some basic things that are just a little different from what many American English speakers may be familiar with. And we're also going to learn basics of word combination and use of suffixes. For example, we're familiar with kapha, for kapha dosha. But when you see kaphaja, it means something that comes from kapha. And that's the use, there's an example of the use of a suffix. And you'll sometimes, in Indian texts, you will see this written as kaphaja, without the final which can be a little confusing. So we're going to try to get you familiar with this kind of thing and try to demystify it as much as possible. So the other 20% is to cover some of the major topics of Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is sometimes referred to as the Gita. is a very important book, both for from a religious and philosophical point of view, as well as from the point of view of yoga practice. It's one of the authoritative books that covers various aspects of yoga practice. And it's required for our NAMA-approved 500-hour and 450-hour courses that we do cover some of the Bhagavad Gita. And we're going to focus on aspects of Bhagavad Gita that are related to Ayurveda and Sankhya philosophy. So some of these topics that we want to cover, obviously very much in brief, are Atma Tattva, or self-knowledge. As you recall, when we cover Sankhya, we talk about Atma as one of the 24 components that are described in Sankhya. And this is one of the topics covered in the Gita, is the Atma Tattva. What is the self? Karma. What is this chain of action and reaction? And as an Ayurvedic practitioner, you really need to understand how karma is involved in someone's state of consciousness and their state of health. It's something that you cannot overlook. And we're going to talk a little bit about the some of the core definitions of Ayurveda as they're given in Sanskrit, and how there's a lot of meaning sometimes in these small terms. The Bhagavad Gita also covers these three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, these three basic qualities of material nature. There are also a lot of verses in the Gita that talk about the mind and the senses and how they interact. One thing that we've covered in Manasa 101 is how this process of thinking, feeling, and willing leads to action. And there are some really stunning gems of verses in the Gita that cover this whole process. And it's mostly slanted towards someone who's aspiring to be a yoga practitioner and to be less involved in the material world, but it's really helpful for you as an Ayurvedic practitioner to understand these kind of processes, because sometimes you're trying to help someone overcome a food addiction or something that has an involvement in this process of thinking, feeling, and willing. And finally, one of the major topics of the Gita is the yoga, and we want to cover some of these yoga systems. Karma yoga, which is the yoga of doing work as a sacrifice for the divine. Ashtanga yoga, the eightfold yoga system. It begins with following some rules and restrictions, and then asana, and then pranayama, and then withdrawing the senses. People think of yoga usually as asana, which is one of the 8 parts, and then sometimes they also know a little bit about people doing yoga asanas and doing breathing exercises, but there are actually 8 parts. And so we're going to talk about Ashtanga yoga. And there's Jnana yoga, the yoga of wise discrimination, the yoga of knowledge, of using, and I like to say wise discrimination rather than knowledge, because it's all about the difference between knowledge and wisdom. I like to say is that, there are different words used in Sanskrit. There's the word jnana and the word vijnana, and vijnana means when someone has applied knowledge. So Jnana Yoga is actually talking about having realized knowledge of this world and using that knowledge to become detached. And then finally there is Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. It's sometimes described as the path of loving devotion, of doing things with a spirit of love, aspiring to connect with the divine in loving union. And that is Bhakti Yoga, which is also a topic that we would like to cover separately in some other discussions. But so talking in the context of the Bhagavad Gita. These are sort of the major topics that we want to touch on. Again, it's about 20% of a 25-hour course, so we're not going to be able to give a huge amount of coverage to the Bhagavad Gita, but we at least want to help you to become familiar with these major topics, and then if you want to study them more in depth, then you would know where to go. So the assessment in this course, we'll have at the end, we'll have an assessment on live pronunciation. We'll do that using the WebEx forum like this, and you will need to have a headset, you know, a headset with a working microphone. Sometimes the built-in microphone on your laptop or desktop will work okay. Sometimes it sounds like you're talking through a tunnel. Very much recommended that you have a headset. We'll ask that you pronounce any 10 terms from out of 100 Ayurvedic glossary list terms. And we'll ask you to pick any single Sanskrit sutra or verse. There are several sutras and verses we're discussing in this presentation. You could take any one of those. I'm also going to be putting more supplemental materials up in the course on the San Diego College of Ayurveda site, and so you'll have quite a lot to choose from. But pick any one, and just, you know, we'll ask you to extempore give the translation and explain it. Tell, you know, say the Sanskrit and give the translation. And which, you know, of course you can memorize. We're not expecting you to learn. The saying in India is that it takes 12 years to learn Sanskrit properly, and I don't really think that's far off the mark. But you can memorize the translation. You can say what it means also, you know, what you have understood about the meaning of that. There'll also be a written quiz. So there'll be a short essay about how Bhagavad Gita relates to Sankhya and Ayurveda, multiple choice questions on the overview of Bhagavad Gita, what's the setting, what are the topics, short written interpretation on any one of the important verses. We have some core verses from Bhagavad Gita and Charaka Samhita, and you'll be able to make reference to the classes and materials for that. We'll ask you to give a short answer, explain the relationship and importance of Sanskrit to Ayurveda, and match or list at least 10 Sanskrit terms for Ayurvedic anatomy related to body parts. So we also have that in our glossary. And give some examples of how Sanskrit can be used as a common ground of understanding for serious scholars, teachers, and practitioners. So a lot of you are people who put a lot of time and effort into studying Ayurveda, and you know, it's natural that you may end up publishing and teaching and giving talks, and even just in your, if you're doing consultations, you may be explaining terms of Ayurveda, concepts of Ayurveda to people who are not familiar with it. So we would like to prepare you for any context, for writing a paper in some journal or just explaining Ayurveda to someone who needs some help with dealing with a food addiction issue. We would like to prepare you for that. So I'd like to start as sort of an auspicious invocation to this course with a verse from Bhagavad Gita. And it's a very interesting one for those of you who've been through the Manasa 101. This is a verse in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that describes the nature of mind. So it goes like this: Bandhuratmatmanastasya yenatmaivatmana jitaha anatmanastu shatrutve vritetatmaiva shatruvat. For one who has conquered the mind it is his best friend. But for one who has failed to do so, it is his worst enemy. So this is a verse that is meant for someone who is aspiring to practice yoga because part of what is done in yoga is to learn to control the mind, to bring the mind, because, we have learned that the mind is a separate thing from the self, although the mind is the seat of consciousness. It's where we do all our thinking, feeling, and willing, but those feelings and willings can lead us astray. So when we have understood something that we want to do and we are trying to keep the mind in check as a yoga practitioner, this is the context here. So this is interesting because the word Atma is used so many times. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 times that the word Atma is used, and it's used in different cases. So Atma is the nominative case. Atmanaha is the genitive case. Atmana is the instrumental case. Sanskrit is a little complex in terms of the way that nouns can be declined. And you have basically 7 declensions of nouns plus the vocative. So, but we're not going to get into all those technical aspects of Sanskrit. But I've given the words broken down with their synonyms. So bandhu is friend, and atma in this case, it means mind. So a Sanskrit verse is a bit like a puzzle. It's put together, and there's really usually only 1 or 2 or 3 ways to understand it. But you have to apply some logic and some knowledge to be able to make sense of it. And this is what I would say makes Sanskrit actually a little challenging to learn. It's not the fact that it has, singular, dual, and plural, and that it has 7 plus 1 noun declensions and 10 conjugational groups of verbs and a few verbal tenses that don't exist in other languages. It's this aspect of how you can encode a lot of information in a verse like this, and sometimes a word like atma for mind is used, and then atma is used to refer to the self, the atma, the soul. So, there's an additional level of meaning that's being encoded there. So it's saying that there's the mind is part of me. It's a manifestation of consciousness, but the real I is the atma, the self. And if I do not, if my mind is not conquered, if it's not jitta, then it is going to cause me trouble. It's going to lead me astray. It can be my enemy. So, so I just wanted to give this as one example of a verse from the Gita, which is describing the yoga process, but it's also relevant as Ayurvedic practitioners for understanding this view on the nature of mind, how mind is something that it is, because it's the manifestation of consciousness, we may think of mind as ourself, but it's a vehicle for consciousness which comes from the self. And if mind is just given free rein and doesn't have any boundaries, it can lead us into trouble. So now I wanted to touch on some basic ideas in Sanskrit. Now that we've sort of breached the topic. We've spewed out a Sanskrit verse here. Then I wanted to talk about how Sanskrit is represented in writing. So the script used is Devanagari. So this is Devanagari. This is an example of Devanagari. This is, in fact, Devanagari. I don't know, some of you may know how to read Devanagari. It's also used for Hindi as well. It's used for Hindi and some other Indian languages. We use a transliterated form like this, which is pretty easy to learn how to pronounce. Devanagari. So we have long syllables like this ah and the e, the long I. It's not necessary to learn Devanagari, but it could be helpful if you have the extra time and you want to do it. It's naturally arranged phonetically. So Devanagari is not a linear, it's actually usually laid out in a two-dimensional grid, and it's arranged phonetically based on the parts of the mouth that we use to pronounce things. So for our Sanskrit terms, we use a standard transliteration scheme, and it's called the IAST standard, and we use diacritical marks. We use marks such as the macron, and that's used for these long vowels, a, e, and u. We also use a subscript dot for this re and n and sh, that s with the dot under it is sh. There's the acute accent for sh, which is somewhere between sa and sh. And don't worry, we're going to go over this in a little bit more detail later. This is just a quick intro. There's a superscript dot that's used for ng and ng, and then there's a tilde. So we're going to cover all this later in detail. In this transliteration system, C is always pronounced like the ch in reach without breath. So you'll see ch, for example. And this combination of J, N with a tilde, and is pronounced like gya. So therefore we have jnana, like jnana yoga. So how is Sanskrit used in Ayurveda? Sanskrit is used in Ayurvedic source texts, and these source texts provide very condensed or pregnant meanings. And I'm using the word pregnant very deliberately. It's a word that many Sanskrit scholars have used. I audited some courses at Columbia with Alex Wayman, and that's where I picked that up. And pregnant meaning means that inside a word there is a potential for life to come out. So some words, for example, guna and sattva. Guna means quality, but it also means something that binds or connects. So the number of times that you'll find guna referred to in Ayurveda is, there are a lot of places where that's going to occur. And there can be sometimes subtly different meanings that bring out different aspects that are inherent in the word guna. Sattva. Sattva can mean it literally means existence, but it also means the mind, because the mind is the seat of consciousness. It means sattva guna, the quality of pure existence, and it also means the lasting quality of something. There's just a long list of things that can be brought out from sattva. So remember what I said about how Sanskrit verses are like puzzles. It's sort of like a puzzle, and the person who is the poet or the sage who has written that, they have given a lot of thought into expressing refined concepts very concisely. And that is, in fact, the name of the language. Sanskrit means refined expression. So the meaning of a word like guna may vary based on context, and this can be a little confusing. Once you understand how it works, once you understand the concept, this is going to help immensely. I remember when I was first exposed to Sanskrit, I was still pretty young, and I just could not figure out how you could get so many different meanings out of the same words. And then I ended up learning and studying many verses and starting to understand how it fits together. There are just layers of meaning. So, you know, we've used this term nonlinear thinking. So Sanskrit is an extremely nonlinear language. It is a language that is suited to expressing things on multiple levels at the same time. So I'm not trying to give you a headache, but I just want to get this idea across that it is, there's a lot of subtlety and there's a lot of potential for refined expression in Sanskrit. And sometimes you will look at translations that seem rather terse and just don't make sense. And if you keep this in mind, that will help you greatly. So if you understand this information density, now I'm using this term specifically, this is an Atulism, the information density of Sanskrit. This will help you understand some translations, especially there are some translations that are given by Indian scholars who are far more learned in Sanskrit than I ever will be. But the translations they give are so terse, they're just basically translating the Sanskrit literally into English, and it sometimes just doesn't really make a lot of sense. When I translate things, my translations tend to be a little more wordy. I try not to put things in that are not in the Sanskrit, but remember we said there are all these pregnant meanings, and sometimes they just have to have kids and they have to come out and dance on the page so that you can really understand what's going on. And you know, if you really want to seriously learn Ayurveda, you want to teach Ayurveda, you want to write papers on Ayurveda, you really need to get source texts like Charaka Samhita, Sushruta Samhita, and you need to be able to read them. And if you don't have this, at least this much background in Sanskrit and understanding these things, it's going to be very difficult for you. Some of you may have already tried that. So Sanskrit is a very useful common ground. Everyone all over the world who studies Ayurveda, okay, can everyone hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. So everyone all over the world who teaches Ayurveda, who studies Ayurveda, who publishes in Ayurveda, they are going to be using Sanskrit terms. So it's a common ground. It's a common set of vocabulary. And we'll try to help you pronounce these terms in a way that will be recognizable. So if you run into, you know, Dr. Vasant Lad at a conference somewhere, you know, you're not going to be embarrassed by saying, yeah, I did my dosa test, and he looks at you funny and saying, what, you mean you made a pancake out of rice and lentils? Oh, dosha. Yes, okay, now I understand. We would like to help you learn to pronounce things in a way that will be recognizable. And it would also show that, you know, I'm a serious student of Ayurveda. I take this seriously. I have really put my effort into studying Ayurveda. I don't say Ayurveda, I say Ayurveda. You know, I am pronouncing it carefully and I am serious about it. And there is a huge body of really valuable research that's published in India. It uses Sanskrit terminology and it may provide very terse references. And you will just see words thrown around like the guna and the dosha of the sharir and the prakriti and vikriti. And there can be a lot of assumptions that someone could associate a single Sanskrit word with a page full of background. So it's a very useful thing. So here we come to what we consider to be one of the very important verses that define Ayurveda. So here I've given the Devanagari and the transliteration, both side by side. When I first started reading books that had Sanskrit, the books had the Devanagari and the transliteration, and I learned to read Devanagari just by sort of comparing the two and figuring out how it all works. But anyway, we're not going to do that. Sharirendriya sattvatma samyogo dhari jivatam nityagascha parigaya raguruchate. Oops, there's a little typo here in the Devanagari, but okay, we'll just hope you didn't notice that. Let's see if I can. Yeah, just get rid of that and everything's okay. So this verse here, now I'm going to give you translation one. One of these is the translation that's in the book, and the other one is my translation. And let's see if you know which is which. So one translation is, living entity is the conjunction of the body, senses, indriya, organs, mind, sattva, and soul, the self, the Atman. Translation number two is, what is life or ayus? It is the combined existence of body, senses, mind, intellect, and self, Atma, sustaining the functions of life and growth, both in their individual functions and in totality. So you'll notice that one of these translations is a bit terse, and it does convey the meaning, but I believe that there is a little bit more that could be made clear. So to me, it's this translation two gives a little bit more of the depth of meaning here. So how has this all come together? Okay, how do we pull all this together? So here's an example of how we've constructed. There are layers of deconstructing when you want to understand a verse like this. We start by breaking up the words because the words all flow together. Sanskrit is a flowing language. For example, there's a really beautiful verse in poetry that goes something like Yamalarjuna Bhanjana Mashrita Danjana Mahiganjana Ganalasya Baram Pashupala Purandaram Abhisrita Kandanamati Sundaram Aradindakaram Rajagopavadhu Jana Virachita Pujana Mudukujana Navavenu Dharam Smadanarma Vichakshana Makilavi Lakshanam Atidakshanam Atidakshataram. So that's one verse, and I was able to memorize that simply because it has such a beautiful rhythm and flow. And there's a way that depth of meaning is conveyed. But when we want to understand the verse, we break it up. So we have sharira, physical body, indriya, senses. Together it becomes sharirendriya. And sattva means mind or consciousness. Atma is the soul, the self, that little spark of the divine that is wrapped by ahankar and associated with mind and intellect. Samyoga means in harmony. Dhari, sustains. Jivatam, the living and growing functions. This comes from the verbal root jiv, literally to live, but it means living in the sense of the living and growing and producing byproducts function of life. Nityaga means separately, individually. And anubandha means in their connected form, in their together form. Pariyayahe means by these things it is defined. And ayuhu means life, life as understood in the word Ayurveda. uchyate, it is said. So, taking all of these synonyms, we come up with this translation. What is life, or ayus? It is the combined existence of body, senses, mind, intellect, and self, sustaining the functions of life and growth, both in their individual functions and in totality. So this is a very important verse which is defining Ayurveda, and it is defining life as it is meant in the term Ayurveda. So let us look at another verse. This is from Sushruta Samhita. So that verse was from Charaka Samhita. Charaka Samhita is divided into divisions. The first one is called Sutrastan, which is a collection of codes. A sutra is a code. It's a very short. It's not necessarily poetry. This is actually a poetic verse. And we also sometimes refer to Sanskrit poetic verses as shlokas. That's a little bit of a misnomer. This is actually a shloka, but there are other Sanskrit verses which are not shlokas. So we'll just call it a verse, just to make things simple. So here's another verse, and this is from Sushruta Samhita from chapter 15, verse 41. Samadosha samagnischa samadhatu malakpriyaha prasannatmendriyamanaha swasthittabhidhiyate. When the three doshas are balanced, when the various agnis are balanced and stable, when the dhatus are in balance and elimination of waste is regular and efficient, when the self or atma, the body, the senses, and mind are in a joyful state, this is said to be the state of good health. So here we have, and also this is expressed as a little equation here. Health equals balanced doshas plus balanced dhatus plus balanced elimination plus a pleasing, happy state of mind and senses. So this is the definition of good health, what it means to be in good health. It's a holistic definition of good health. If you are able to be physically fit, but you're unhappy, then that's not considered to be good health. If you feel good, but your physical state is not good, then that's also not considered to be good health. So what is the aim and objective of Ayurveda? So you remember I said that we can have Sanskrit, which is expressed as poetry, and Sanskrit, which is expressed as codes. So here is a code, or sutra. Sutra literally means thread. The definition of a sutra in Sanskrit is to, and there are a number of books called sutra. For example, Vedanta Sutra we may have heard of. Kama Sutra is another sutra that people have definitely heard of. There are many types of sutras. A sutra basically means I want to take as much knowledge as possible and express it in as few words as possible. Why? Because traditionally Sanskrit knowledge was memorized. People did not go around with books that they had to carry or have a Kindle in their purse that they could whip out and look things up. People carried knowledge in their heads, and the more dense and condensed you could make the knowledge, the less cargo space you need in your brain for carrying it around. You just have to do that work of studying Sanskrit and learning how to get the meaning out of this very, very dense little nugget of words. So this sutra from Charaka Samhita defines the aim and objective of Ayurveda. Prayojanam chasya swastasya swastya rakshanam aturasya vikara prashanamanam cha. So prayojanam means the aim and objective or goal. Swastasya means for a healthy person. Swastya means of good health. Rakshanam is protection. Aturasya for one who is afflicted, for one who is sick. Vikara, that which causes things to be in an unnatural state of dis-ease. Prashamanam, the pacification, balance, or reduction. So the translation is the purpose of Ayurveda is to maintain continued good health for healthy persons and to alleviate disorders in the diseased. And a paraphrase is to say, and we try to give paraphrasing in parentheses when the paraphrasing might help explain it better, to synergistically and holistically manage the imbalance in bodily and mental health without any side effects and guide the patient back to a healthy condition. So we get a lot of meaning just out of something like vikara prashamanam, because vikara means that which has caused things to transform, that which has caused things to go away from their normal, natural, happy state. And prashamanam means we want to pacify, we want to bring it back into balance. We are not trying to change the nature of things. We are recognizing that there's a natural balance and something has disturbed that natural balance, and let's try to get you back in balance and not create more problems. And one last verse for today. This is from Charaka Samhita again. What are the 4 types of ayu? Hitahitam sukam dukkam ayurasya hitahitam manam chatatcha yatroktam Āyurveda sa uchyate. Ayus is life. And yes, so vikar and vikriti are slightly different. So vikar, so they both come from the same verbal root with the same prefix. In fact, vi is a prefix that is used to for separation, when something has gone away or has gone into, and prefixes and suffixes are used extensively in Sanskrit. And they are like little components that you bolt together. And when you add those components, they modify the word. And based on the word, they can modify in many different ways. So vikar means that which has transformed. And in this case, when we talk about a transformation that has to be balanced, it's understood that it is not, I wouldn't say a deformity, but a disorder. Vikriti means the thing which is, so prakriti is nature. It is that which is the normal state of something. Vikriti is the transformed state or the abnormal state. So there's a very subtle difference in meaning between vikara and vikriti. But yeah, so I would not use the term deformity actually for either of those. But I would say that vikriti means the abnormal state, and vikar means means disorder. But again, I am saying that based on the context partly. So so this is defining 4 types of life or ayus. There's hita ayus, a life with righteous living and truthfulness, living in harmony with nature. Ahita ayus, a self-absorbed life, not living in harmony with nature, other entities, and the environment. Sukha ayus, good health with sound body and mind, and a life with comforts and partial consideration to nature. Dukkha ayus is a disturbed mental and physical state with accumulation of negative karma. So there is a verse which is defining 4 types of ayu, 4 types of life. So there are actually a few other verses that that I have, but we've really run past our time for this first session. I hope you found it interesting. As far as translations, so I am going to post some bibliographic information. We have a Sushrita Samhita by Professor K.R. Srikantamurthy, and it is published by Chokumbha Orientalia in Varanasi, India. We also have a Charaka Samhita by P.V. Sharma, which is also published by Chokumbha Orientalia. We will post information on that and other Sanskrit resource guides. Yes, the module for this class is Sanskrit 101. When you go into, you should see that listed under Block 2. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to continuing.